Good morning, everyone. We have our very last video today for our Chapter 1. As we know, we're going to be taking our Chapter 1 test on the September 30th and October 1st. So on whatever day you're going to be in class, you're going to take the paper copy, and then you're going to have some questions on Schoology for whatever day is your distance day. All right, so let's make sure we're getting ready for that. We've got our very last section. We're on page 19 in your student journal, and we're doing absolute value equations. All right, so take a second. You can copy down this vocabulary. All right, this is the more important one. All right, an absolute value equation, that's what we're solving for this section. It's an equation that contains an absolute value expression. Okay, so remember absolute value, the little lines, they tell you, okay, you take any value and you're saying, okay, a -2, absolute value of -2 would change to +2. All right, it always changes to positive. If you have absolute value of +2, that's still +2. Okay, remember that general rule for absolute value. Technically, the most specific definition I can give, it's the distance from 0. Okay, so it's never going to turn into a negative number because you can't be -2 units away from 0. You can only be positive units away. Okay, so think about that, and I'm going to show you how we use that to solve these absolute value equations. And then extraneous solution, copy it down and keep it in your brain, all right, because there are going to be some things that we do that have extraneous solutions. But look at what it says. It says it's an apparent solution that does not satisfy the original equation. So we solve out this equation using all the steps, we get an answer, we plug it back in, and it doesn't work. All right, there's certain types of absolute value equations that this is going to happen to, but we're not going to have any problems that do this. Okay, we can have a problem that says no solution, but I'll show you how that happens. It's a very specific time when you get a no solution. Okay, extraneous solution means you solve it out, but that solution doesn't work in the original equation. This can happen with absolute value equations. We're not going to have any problems where it does. All right. So we have to remember a couple different rules with our absolute value. Okay, we always know, like I said a second ago, the absolute value of any number, any value is always going to be greater than 0. Okay, so no matter what it is, the absolute value of -x, that's going to be +x. Okay, it's always going to change to a positive number, or if you had 0, absolute value of 0 is 0. Okay, it's the distance away from 0, so that is 0 units away from 0. We've got absolute value of a of a certain number is equal to, okay, of the negative version is equal to the absolute value of the positive version. Okay, think about that in numbers. Absolute value of -3 is the same as the absolute value of 3. That makes sense, right? Because they're both equal to 3. Then we have, if you have two absolute value that you are multiplying together, so the absolute value of 2 times the absolute value of 3, you can combine them into one absolute value symbol. Okay, same thing here with division. If I had absolute value of A divided by absolute value of B, we can combine that all into one division problem. Okay, the most useful ones are going to be 1 and 2. That's the one I see you guys using the most. All right. So the thing to remember, there's 2 steps I want you guys to follow when you're solving out these absolute value equations. Okay, the first thing that you need to do, you need to make sure the absolute value is isolated on one side. Okay, just like we isolate a variable, you want nothing but just that absolute value expression on one side of your equation. So the first step for a lot of these problems is moving other terms and moving other numbers so that you just have absolute value is equal to some number. Okay, absolute value of x is equal to 3, something similar to that. Okay, then once you've done that, you're going to set opposite side equal to positive and negative. Let's take this very simple example right here, this negative x is equal to 3. You've got to split this into two separate equations. Okay, you've got to say, well, I know that the inside of this absolute value, it could be 3, right? Absolute value of 3 is 3, or it could be negative 3, because the absolute value of negative 3 is also 3. So to solve this out, I've got to say, okay, well, x could be negative 3, or x could be positive 3. Okay, and I'll show you a couple examples of that. Okay, but for the most part, keep in mind, when you're solving absolute value, you've got to split it into two equations, a positive and a negative. All right, so let's look at that. Do I have room? Okay, this is the math speak way to say what I just said. Okay, to solve this out, you've got to make it equal to the positive and the negative. All right, and so we've got, let's do absolute value of 2x minus 1 is equal to 7. All right, I'm going to need to split this into two equations. I have to say, well, I'm going to take out my absolute value and say the thing inside this absolute value sign, the 2x minus 1, it could be equal to negative 7, or it could be equal to positive 7. Right? If I know what's inside the absolute value sign turns into 7, it could be negative 7 or it could be positive 7. So I have over here, I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get this 2x is equal to negative 6. I'm going to divide both sides by 2, and I get x is equal to negative 3. All right, same thing over here. I'm going to add 1 to both sides. So I get 2x is equal to 8. Divide on both sides. So x is equal to 4. Okay, so I get two answers. X is negative 3. X is positive 4. All right, and I want to show you one other thing on this example. Okay, I've got 2x minus 1. I'm going to do a really similar problem. What if I had something like this? Absolute value of 2x minus 1 is equal to negative 7. Well, that doesn't quite work, right? I'm never going to have a value inside my absolute value that could equal negative 7. All right, absolute value never turns into a negative number. So once you have this absolute value, once you have this equation, if you have absolute value is equal to some negative number, it's just no solution. Okay, remember in 1.3 we talked about a couple equations that have no solution? This is one of those. Okay, so if its absolute value is equal to a negative number, you know it's no solution. Okay, people on tests love to trip you up on that. Okay, so always make sure you're double checking that. All right, I've got a couple more examples. So I know this says solving equations with two absolute values. I'm not going to do any with two absolute values. We're keeping it pretty simple on this one. But let's go ahead and use the space to solve out a couple more equations because I've got a couple more examples. Okay, so first one, I want to do 3x plus 9. Okay, be careful with your absolute value. Make sure it doesn't look like a 1. Okay, 3x plus 9 minus 10 is equal to -4. Okay, so remember that first step I had you write out in your notes. You always want to isolate your absolute value first. So that means you take this -10, this minus 10, and you're going to have to move it to the other side. You're going to have to get rid of it with your inverse operation. Okay, you want just absolute value equals a number before you can solve. All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I have this -10. I'm going to undo that by adding 10 here to both sides. All right, so I get absolute value of 3x plus 9 is equal to +6. All right, this makes sense, right? I don't have equal to a negative number, so I can solve this out. All right, I split it into two equations. It's 3x plus 9 equals -6, and 3x plus 9 is equal to +6. Okay, when you split it, you don't need these absolute value signs anymore. Okay, that's what allows you to take out the absolute value, splitting it into negative and positive. Okay, so on this step, you don't need those absolute value signs anymore. Okay, so let's solve this one. We've got plus 9, so let's subtract 9 from both sides. And I get 3x is equal to -15. And then, okay, divide by 3 on both sides. I've got x is equal to -5. Right, my final answer on these can always be negative. Just be sure that this number right here is never negative when you still have those absolute value signs. All right, let's solve out the other one. Again, we're going to subtract 9. I get 3x is equal to -3. Okay, divide by 3. I get x is equal to -1. Okay, so those are my two answers, -5 and -1. All right, and I've got just one more example I want to show you. This is about the most complex that you'll see. So I've got 4, 7 minus 2x plus 4 is equal to 12. So again, first step, I always want to get my absolute value on its own first. Okay? This 4 on the outside, absolute value is a type of grouping symbol. So technically, you could distribute the 4 into this, but I think the easier way to think of this and the way to make sure you're not going to make a goofy mistake, I would say, okay, first let's deal with this +4 out here. Okay, just like we did for this 10. Let's get rid of that. So I've got 4 times 7 minus 2x on the inside of my absolute value. Okay, I subtracted 4, so I end up with 8. So right here, I don't have just absolute value isolated on one side. I want to take out this 4 is multiplying my absolute value. So to get rid of it, I'm going to divide by 4 and divide by 4. Okay, I think that's the easiest way to deal with this. You've got a 4 that you're multiplying this absolute value by, so we're going to divide both sides by 4 to get rid of it. So I've got 7 minus 2x, and my absolute value is equal to 2. Okay, I've got absolute value on one side all by itself is equal to some positive number, so I can keep going. I'm going to split it into my two equations. So 7 minus 2x is equal to -2, and 7 minus 2x is equal to +2. All right, I want to get rid of my 7 here, so I'm going to subtract here on both sides. So I've got -2x is equal to -9, divide by -2, divide by -2, and here x is equal to, you could turn this into a decimal, or you could just leave this here as 9/2, okay, 9/2. That's as simplified as you can get it. But since you've got a negative divided by a negative, your final answer is going to be positive. And then over here, same thing, subtract 7 and subtract 7. I've got -2x is equal to -5. You're going to divide both sides here by -2. And over here, your final answer is going to be 5/2. Okay? So you could have that as a decimal if you want, but again, let's try and get used to fractions when we can. Go ahead, I should have that 1.4 assignment posted for you, and that'll be your very last homework assignment that you need to turn in for Chapter 1. Make sure you've got all your Chapter 1 homework assignments in, okay? The very last day to do that, remember, is Thursday. Here, let me write it down. Thursday, October 1st. All right, remember, before midnight on that day, you've got to have everything turned in if you want me to look at it. Okay, so don't forget to do that. Don't forget to study for your test, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.